Hold on here. Stop recording. Okay. I'm gonna stop it because I got their order reversed. So I'll start. You'll hear the music. We'll go from there. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com. Also WFOV 92.1, and we are glad to have them with us as well over here at the studio that's located in the city of Flat. And we are trying to bring some different news to you, and I want to commend the role that's being played in that regard by WFOV. Paul Herring, you're doing an excellent job over there, and want to also thank Odyssey House, who is sponsoring the studio over there, and I want you to continue to find jobs that you're doing. We're trying to do our part over here, and today we're going to do some things that no one else, I think, is touching on. I want to give some background to the noise being made right now about the Congress of the United States, the House of Representatives in this case, that is talking about bringing charges against Barr. And Barr is following the law, and they're trying to make it appear that he's trying to hide evidence because we have an outlaw Congress. And anytime you install these people in power that don't have the welfare of the country at heart, you're going to get these kinds of blurs in terms of what really is going on behind the scenes, and then really in front of our faces as well, because they don't have any shame, and they're doing these things now out in the open. And what used to be clandestine and behind the scenes, we're now finding out that these people are coming out right in front of our faces and making a mockery of the rule of law. And I have no respect for the Constitution, which they're shredding every day. I was telling you once before that I was put off of Facebook, and the reason why that happened was not because I was using any kind of profane language or doing anything that was pornographic or anything like that. I wrote a 3-part series on Facebook, and I identified the real problem that blacks are facing in this country. And I took it away from the narrative that the left would love to have blacks to carry forward, the idea that racism is blocking all the advancement of blacks in this country, and if we have any failures, then it's because racism has acted as a blocker, and white privilege is one of the impediments that we are facing as a group. And it doesn't seem to be stopping a whole lot of folks. Oprah certainly wasn't stopped by it. And those persons that are excelling in these different arenas and showing that they are the best and brightest is not stopping them either. But when I began to write this 3-part series on the real problem that has set blacks back in this country, which is not racism. Racism was much more extant in the population and in the country in the past than it is right now. And if it could not stop Booker T. Washington and W. Du Bois and so many others, then given the level of impediments at the time that they were alive, and if it could not stop them, it would behoove us to make sure that we're not lying about how it is a higher barrier now than it was then, and the results that we're now seeing in our communities can be placed upon the racist, so-called racist society that we live in. And if the society was as racist as they say it is, we would not have to make up all this racism that's being made up in all these cases here. And that goes back to things like hands up, don't shoot, and making up that narrative about what happened in Ferguson, claiming that Michael Brown had his hands up, and for no legitimate reasons, the officer opened up on him and fired his gun and killed this kid who was acting innocent and had really capitulated and given himself up and was shot down, and people up there holding their hands up, demonstrating and acting like this noise that they were making had any credence or any kind of validity, and that we're just being shot. Blacks are being shot down for no reason. And they are being shot down. They're being shot down by other blacks, primarily in this country. And I was writing along that line, and because the liberal media, of which Facebook is one part of that, they want to carry this narrative forward because they know as long as you look on the wrong side of the road, you will never be able to find out what really is the nature of the problem that we're facing. And I had identified it in this 3-part series, and I said that the problem that blacks are facing is not racism in this country, that is not nearly the level it was in our parents' and grandparents' day, and that was basically because of the Democratic Party. That was the impediment. The party's apparatus, the Klan and all that set up against blacks, basically a Democratic Party operation. And once we were able to, King was able to succeed in getting the right to vote for those persons in the southern states that were being blocked from going to the polls. Once they got the ballot, which King called for 11 years before he was assassinated, meaning that he called for give us the ballot in 1957. Once that had occurred 8 years after the march, the first march on Washington, which occurred 3 years after the Brown versus Board of Education case, once the ballot had been secured in the South through the Voting Rights Act of 1965, then because blacks can now go to the polls and vote, the Southern Democrats, you can call them Dixiecrats if you want to, but they were Southern Democrats that were endorsed by the Northern Democrats because they could not have been doing what they were doing in the South if the North had not, in fact, backed them up. Once the vote was secured in the South by the Voting Rights Act of 1965, then the Democrats began to fall back from their racial oppression of blacks in the South. And that was because of what King had called for, give us a ballot. And he said in that speech, if you go back and look at it, he said that if you give blacks the ballot, he said that blacks would not even need the federal government, because King began, even at that point, to understand that this was a political problem. And the reason blacks were denied the right to vote in the southern states at that time is because they knew that blacks would go to the polls and vote for the Republican candidates. And the solid South, which was solid in the southern states because of the outcome of the so-called Civil War, they knew that if blacks could exercise the ballot, that they would, in fact, do a tidal wave of going to the polls and voting for the Republican candidates. And they were not going to allow that, with the Democratic Party stronghold being in those 11 former Confederate states. So it's a lot of history here, and we need to understand it so we can begin to make better decisions. But I wrote the real problem that black people are facing today, and it's not racism that is blocking blacks' advancement. I wrote the 3-part series. I dare anybody to come behind and say anything other than what I said, and I said that the real problem that blacks are just facing blacks today in this country is liberalism, and that's on the part of white liberals, and there's also liberalism in the black community, that we moved away from the conservative strictures that were once in our community in such personages as the great Booker T. Washington, who is one of the great black political figures that this country has produced. And that does not mean that everybody will endorse that view, but I'm right and they're wrong. And before we got into this protest tradition, which was the Du Boisian view of things, we had builders, we had people that were doers, and Booker T. Washington was a doer. And that's why they have the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. And Du Bois does not have anything that he ever built because he was a talker. And so we have those two schools of thought. But I wrote this article, these three articles, and Facebook had to silence my voice because I was having a lot of people on both sides of the racial divide that was reading my articles, and because I was not pointing a finger and blaming whites for what was happening in the black community, Facebook had to definitely get me out of there, and they did so by first of all, claiming that, first of all, they asked me, they told me that my site had been hacked. And I'm trying to figure out how my site had been hacked when I'm not complaining about it. I'm not reporting any hacking on my site. And I had never said that I was not the one that was authoring the articles on my Facebook post, but yet they're going to declare out of whole cloth that the site had been hacked, and they wanted to therefore verify whether it was me writing these articles, because they didn't expect any black person to be saying what I was saying. And I'm saying it in anybody's face because all I care about is the truth. And I don't care who does not like it or who endorses it or any of that. The only thing that moves me is the truth. And I have not had one person, all these yackers, all these screamers, not had one person that come against anything that I've written or anything I've said on this network that has disproved anything that I said. And I'm going to be saying some things today that I'm throwing out there. And if you have anything that will contest it with information that you have, then bring that to the forum, because I can always learn from others who have done more research than I've done, but I have not met those persons. Not a single one here in the city of Flint. And I'm not bragging about it, just telling you the truth. But I wrote this article and I said that blacks' problem in this country today is liberalism. And it's not only just the liberalism on the outside, but it's also blacks' own liberalism. And once that had become a statute kind of thing, almost like it's some law that we are following, where you are supposed to carry a certain point of view. And if you have another point of view, then you are a sellout. You are a person that has, I don't know who's buying, by the way, but you're supposed to have sold out. And this point of view is the one that's correct. The other one is not correct. And this one is in vogue, and this one's outlawed. And if the one that is the mainstream view is the correct one, the question has to be asked then, why are we living with these results? If 90-some-odd% of the people that are voting every year for the Democratic Party candidates who have the black community surrounded, if that really is the way to, in fact, marshal the politics in the black community, then how do you explain the results in every urban city in this country? You don't have to talk about Chicago and Philadelphia and Baltimore, Detroit and Saginaw and Flint and these other cities. You can talk about any of them and just call them out. Go down in alphabetical order, just call them out. And I guarantee you that every urban community in this country that has a black majority in the cities, I can guarantee you right now that every last one of them is surrounded by Democrats. This city here is surrounded by Democrats. And the results are the same everywhere you go. If that's all I'm saying is this, and I'm saying it in anybody's face that gets offended by it, because I don't care what people say.
Do you think that people who vote for Democrats actually want to have a bad city so they can sit around and discuss how disenfranchised they are? Because it seems like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They could have a great life. They vote in a largely Democratic area, and people in the city, they control it, and they have this kind of patronizing tone and connection to people, and then basically the place becomes a total sinkhole, to live in. I think it's self-fulfilling prophecy. They like to feel like they're oppressed. They don't know how to deal with an identity that doesn't deal with that perspective.
That is a point made by Shelby Steele in his book, quite a few of his books, and also some of the books that have been written by some of the writers that have taken a conservative position. Shelby Steele is probably the main one out there that has written about the shock of the fear of racial responsibility. As long as you can claim that you have this desire to go forward, but it's not possible because there's something that is out there that is stopping the forward movement, then it takes away the responsibility for anything to change based upon your own efforts. And I think Shelby Steele's book, one of the major ones is white guilt, by the way, which is another thing we have to deal with, is these white liberals walking around with 10 pounds of guilt, always wanting to sympathize with blacks, and therefore this paternalistic racism that they import doesn't help any blacks. These people that went to Shopton and kissed his ring the other day, where they all went before the Action Network and kissed Al Sharpton's ring as he was asking them their position on reparations. And of course, they're going to all say they're for it and so on and so forth, knowing that it's never going to happen. There's nobody going to write anybody a check in this country because of some work that was done by somebody's grandparents. There was some dues that were owed in that regard, but it's not owed to anybody that's alive right now, because none of them were in that cotton patch. And to say that you're going to get a check in the name of those who did the suffering and you're going to collect, I would only ask you this much: how much of that money goes to, for example, the gang members? How much of it goes to those persons that are leaving, that are not marrying the mothers of their children? How much of that money should be paid to those that are doing a job on destroying the race through the abortion clinics? How much do they get? And then look at the totality of the problems that black people are facing right now, and we're going to put a check in their hand when they've sold out the suffering of their people by the things that we're doing right now in the black community. I'm here to tell you that in case you don't know it. And I don't care if you like it or not. I'm going to tell you the truth. And this, the impediment is where blacks have their feet in their own way, and they're blocking their own advancement with the nonsense that's being perpetuated by these so-called leaders. I will tell you this also. I'm reminded of a conversation that I had back in the 70s, and I remember having a conversation with the great James Baldwin, who was a writer of so many of books that I was reading in college, and I just loved the way he put words down on paper, and I was just so impressed with his political insights. And I had a chance to meet him in Oakland, at Oakland University. And I asked him, when we were in the hallway walking down the hallway talking together, and I asked him, I said, Mr. Baldwin, let me ask you a very important question. I want to ask you about your view of the present state of black leadership, because Malcolm X had been killed in '65 and Martin Luther King had been killed in '68. And then the charlatans stood up in their place, and you know all of them because some of them are still around even today. Not Sharpton, because Sharpton was a Johnny-come-lately person. He stood up after the Tawana Brawley hoax in 1987. So he wasn't even around during the time of the civil rights movement, but he was one of the ones that came up in his charlatan role and stood in the gap once these fallen leaders had in fact martyred themselves by their commitment to the cause. So I asked him, I said, Mr. Baldwin, what do you think about black leadership? I think this might have been around 74, 75, somewhere around there. And Baldwin chastised me with the tone of his voice and the tone of his answer. He said, his words were, when I asked him what he thought about black leadership, he said to me in this tone, he said, "Are you kidding?" He said, "There's no black leadership, but understand I'm saying this to you and not the New York Times." And I understood that in terms of him saying that we're having a private conversation, walking down the hall of one of the buildings at Oakland University. We're in a private conversation, discussion about that issue. He was talking to me about it in private, but he's not going to go up there and blare it out in the headlines on the front page of the New York Times. But he wanted me to know that these people out here running this scam, there is no black leadership.
See, I think that's kind of interesting because they say black leadership, the term. I'm always been puzzled by that, because I knew a lot of blacks who were even back 15, 20 years ago, weren't lockstep with the Democratic Party. Matter of fact, one guy I met who was a Xerox repairman he was working at the university one time, just doing it. He came over to respond. He told me basically he outlined his political beliefs, totally opposed, the Democratic lock on the the black leader, black population. And but when the term just black leadership is like, Well, if I were to use white leadership, I'd be confused to be a white nationalist.
Yeah, right.
So it's like, well, no, aren't you supposed to look at your own position in life and say, how are these policies going to affect me?
Yeah.
And I could say if you could look at what the Democrats have advocated for in the past, dependency on the government, and where that's led the black population overall, I'd say that's probably a bad course of action. Alter it, but basically, is when are they going to get to the point where it's actually everybody expects them to be looking forward to our black, leadership? Or a white. Like I said, if I said a white leadership, oh my God, visions of the Klan and race, and the Nazis would come to mind.
It's ridiculous.
But it's ridiculous. I think as an individual with dark skin, or you got different change, you got a different position in life, you should say, how's these policies or what they're intending to do going to impact on me? You got to be self-centered, selfish.
There are two things I can say about that. Based upon some documentation I can go to and show that that whole concept is really it's a real problem here because the concept itself of black leadership is an oxymoron that has been pointed out first of all by Booker T. Washington in 1911. Booker T. Washington said there's a segment of Negroes, which is the words that was being used at that time to define blacks. There's a segment of Negroes who found out that they can make a living by holding the Negroes' grievance up in front of the public. And he said that they do not want blacks to lose their grievance because they don't want to lose their jobs. And that's really why Sharpton, by the way, was down there asking about reparations. Sharpton is not a chance in hell that somebody's going to start writing a check for people that did not do the work and did not do the suffering, but benefited from the suffering. Every black person in this country is a beneficiary of the suffering of those persons in those cotton fields. And therefore, they have what Sharpton and these other shysters, these charlatans have done, is they've twisted around the indebtedness. The indebtedness is those who are here now that are benefiting from the fact that they paid this price for this day. The bill is due to us. We're the ones we owe them something, such as our best effort to respect their sacrifice and so on and so forth. But there are two documents you can point to. One is a statement made by Booker T. Washington that about these sheiks. He saw it back in 1911. That's 108 years ago. And those same games, the segment of Negroes who hold up black people's grievance in front of them, they're doing that right now. And Sharpton does not plan to go away because it pays. He doesn't intend to solve any of the problems facing black people. They want to hold those grievances out because through those grievances being held out, they are the beneficiaries of it. The other document is even more important and profound. That's a book written by Bunny Allen, and her book is called We Are Overcome. The civil rights movement was We Shall Overcome. That was a song during the 1960s. We shall overcome. And Bunny Allen later on wrote a book called We Are Overcome, meaning that each one of us has something to say about it. Therefore, we are the ones we've been waiting for. We weren't waiting for Al Sharpton. He's the one that jumped in front of the black community through this hoax that he perpetuated in New York to Warner Brawley. That hoax that he ran, he's been running hoax ever since. And people listen to this shyster, you got to be out of your mind. Listen to a man like this that's been gaming the black community from 1987. Let's see, this is, how many years would that be? From 87, 32 years. Yeah, 32 years. More than 3 decades, this man been running these games. And the black condition's gotten worse and worse and worse because these people do not intend to try to do anything to solve this problem. If anything, they make the problem worse. But Bunny Allen, her book is very important along this line in this conversation. Somebody need to read it. It's called We Are Overcome. And in that book, she writes down the 5 myths about black leadership. Myth number one is that all black leaders are leading in the same direction. If that were the case, they'd all be under the same umbrella. I'm not calling for them to be under the same umbrella, but it would certainly lead to that. If they're leading and they have the same goals in mind, then under one umbrella to increase the numbers and increase and maximize the pressure and so on, and the mobilization that's required, if they were serious, then you'd be under one organization and you'll be leading in the same direction, all the forces cooperating with each other to get the job done. Another one of the five, she said there are five myths about black leadership. And myth number two is, and this is probably the most important one, myth number two is that blacks need to be led. And if they need to be led, then why? Okay, we're coming up on a break from WFOV, and we are always glad to have you come back when you take your 4-minute break. We will see you on the other side of the break and hope you will come back this time as well. And we'll see you in 4 minutes. We're going to continue what we're saying here. That's not the main thing I want to talk about today. I wanted to come in and kind of say a few things about the state of the black community and why the community is in the state that it's in. It's because the Democratic Party has run that black people do in a different way what they've done in the past. And you cannot claim, not that either one of the parties is worth anything, neither party is going to liberate anybody in this country, and both of them are a problem in the country, not only to blacks, but to the country itself. Neither one of them is for. In fact, we don't even have representation in this country by the political class in the United States anymore. The Constitution has been shredded. These people are more representative of the immigrants, the illegal immigrants in the country than they are the American people. And both of them are pariah groups, and each party has got to be dealt with, but the Democrats first, because they are the worst of the two. But do not get me wrong here in terms of how bad both parties are, because we lost the grip on this party when they shredded the Constitution of the United States. And you saw an example of it. You know what you're looking at. You saw an example of it last week. You saw, for example, this Burr in the Senate. Richard Burr, North Carolina chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. This man, who is a Republican, is the one that initiated the subpoena to bring Donald Trump's son back to the Congress to testify about something that's a done deal. We have the Mueller report. They said it's going to be the end and all of what they need to find out occurred in 2016. They said we don't know what occurred in 2016. What occurred was that we had 63 million persons went to the poll and voted for Donald Trump, and they did so without any push, any pressure, anybody from the outside of the country compelling them to go to the poll and vote against Hillary Rodham Clinton. They voted for an outsider, and they had done the same thing in the general election, November the 8th, 2016, as they had done in the primary in the Republican Party when Donald Trump set down 14 seasoned politicians because the American people didn't want any of them. And they were doing the same thing in the Democratic Party because Hillary Clinton didn't win the primary in the Democratic Party. And without Schultz having manipulated the vote in the Democratic Party and also the superdelegates, if they had not done what they did, then Hillary Clinton would not have been the nominee in the Democratic Party. She had been rejected over in the Democratic Party. And when she did not, in fact, accept the defeat, then the Bernie Sanders voters and others that were in the Democratic Party that knew there had been sham in that party, they went and voted for other candidates. Some of them even voted for Donald Trump. And that's why she lost. They stopped going to her rallies. You can go back and look at this yourself. They stopped going to her rallies. Not that she was getting a lot of persons at her rallies in the first place. And they turned away from her. And Donald Trump won decisively, 306 electoral votes. So we know what happened. They just are not going to accept the idea of an outsider coming in to what is a closed club that's run by those who call themselves Democrats and those who call themselves Republicans when there are no Democrats and no Republicans in Congress, not a single one. And the best thing you can do when they start running their noise on television, the best thing to do is turn them off. And when they come up for re-election, vote them out. Do what Peter Schweizer says. And he's not talking about Democrats or Republicans, he's talking about both. Throw them all out. I want to welcome WFOV back. And we're still ranting here about the real condition of this country and what really is going on. But look at what Richard Burr did. Richard Burr came up. Now, this is in the Senate. Don't forget that the Republican Party has a majority in the Senate. But they have to be very careful, because if they come out full force and show that the Republican Party is just as much against the outcome of the election in 2016 as the Democrats are, then the game that they're running on the American people is up. And therefore, they have to throw the stone, but continue to hide their hand. But every once in a while, they are exposed to the light of day. And that's what happened last week when Richard Burr did a subpoena of the president's son. And there's not one thing that he can say that has not been said before. I think he testified, I think he was called before the committee of the Congress and testified 20 hours. I think he talked to Mueller, a combination of Mueller and the Congress, 20 hours. There's nothing this man can say other than what he's already said. But this is the idea of that is that this man is being called back because they want to harass this president, and they will not leave this man alone until they get him to step down or do something that is outside the mix. They really want him, and he didn't fall for it, but they really want him to engage in obstruction of justice. And look at how they are trying to make it appear that the Mueller report did not bring charges against the president only because he is the president of the United States. But if he had been a Joe Blow normal citizen, they had enough evidence, in fact, to bring about obstruction. They're trying to make it appear that the report has in it, obviously, there are cases that could have been carried forward with obstruction, but because he's a president, they did not, in fact, carry forth that charge. But that's not what the Mueller report did. The Mueller report opened up the possibility of looking into. I mean, look what Mueller was doing here now. Don't ever overlook Mueller's role in this. Mueller had intended to throw the political case into the hands of the House of Representatives, where the Republicans have a minority voice, and the Democrats are running it because they won. I should say won. They were handed the election in 2018. Don't ever doubt that election that was where the Democrats took over the House in 2018. Don't ever doubt that the House was handed to the Democrats. 39 Republicans did not run for re-election in the House of Representatives. 26 of them, go check it out, look at the documentation. 26 of them did not seek political office again. Of the 39, then 13 then stepped down from the House and ran for other offices. Some ran for governorship, some ran in the Senate and things of that sort. But 26 didn't run for office because they knew they could not stand in the House and be out there up front voting against Donald Trump and not expose the fact that we have a duopoly in this country. We have two parties, a duopoly acting as a monopoly behind the closed doors. Both parties are working against the American people. There is no representation. We have taxation in this country without representation. And we stood up in two different cases in this country with guns against it. That's another reason why they want these guns. Because once the American people find out what they're dealing with, it's going to be hot in the old town. And they are bent upon disarming the American people because they know what's coming. There's not one Democrat in the House of Representatives or one Democrat in the Senate, and there's not one Republican in the House or in the Senate, and you can call yourself anything you want to. But those words have a meaning, and it does not mean anything that they're doing in Washington right now. This country is being run by criminals. The criminal class is running this country. And Richard Burr, who is not going to seek re-election in 2022, he's not up for re-election in 2020. If he were, then he would not have done what he did. But he knows he's not up for re-election immediately in the Senate. He's not running again in 2022, and that's why he exposed himself. But look at what the persons that were on that committee said about him having subpoenaed Donald Trump Jr. They were all saying how it was necessary because we're seeking closure and things of that side. You had closure. You had closure with the Mueller report. And Mueller did not find any collusion, and he left the door open about obstruction, thinking that the door would be left open for the impeachment process, because legally he could not bring any claim, because legally it did not reach up to the level of there being a legal challenge to the president. But politically, he thought that the House would run with it, and then they would take the matter forward in terms of the political aspect. But then that was shortchanged, because Barr came behind Mueller. Mueller never thought this would happen, never thought that he would be outflanked. But what really happened there is that when Barr looked at the report, you could say that they were being led to the conclusion that these are impeachable, these are things that could bring about impeachment. What Barr did was come to read the report, saw that Mueller had not made a conclusion about obstruction, but opened the door for the possible impeachment on that. And he closed the door that had been left open by Mueller and came behind Mueller and said that there was no obstruction. In other words, Mueller did not make a conclusion about it, and so Barr made the conclusion. And that was another way that he outsmarted what Mueller had in mind. And Mueller could not come behind it, by the way, because he'd been boxed in by Barr making the conclusion that he did not make. He could not come behind Barr and say that that's not the conclusion, because Mueller didn't make a conclusion. He was outsmarted by Barr. And Barr has now, as of yesterday, has appointed a person that's now going to go after and look into how this whole scam got started in the first place. I have to tell you something. These criminals that are in the government of Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital, they had intended to put Donald Trump in jail. They were going to teach a lesson here, that this is a club, and anyone trying to break in from the outside into this club, they're going to make an example of this man. But 63 million people had another idea, and they went to the poll and endorsed this outsider who had never held elective office. And that lets the rulers know how much they are detested in this country. Can you imagine a person going to a doctor who's never practiced in the medical field and go to him and ask him to do the operation, and the people that are medical practitioners are bypassed? Can you imagine how embarrassing that would be to the medical profession if a non-practitioner would be the one you go to because you think these guys right here would do a bunched up job? Do you know how bad that would be if somebody would do that and they go to an outsider?
Do you remember years ago, there was a guy that he applied for a job at a school district for being a janitor. He accidentally got hired as a teacher. Did you ever hear about this? And he taught a whole year, and guess what? At the end of the school year, the kids he taught scored better on all the tests.
Yeah, right.
So he had no training whatsoever to be, the what they call that, the methodology classes and all that, and he still did it, carried out. See, I think Donald Trump's got more relevant experience than, say, Barack Obama did to be president, because he was Trump had been a president of a corporation. What did Obama have? He spent his time after he got elected a senator of Illinois to prepare to run for be the president. That's all he did. He was absent many times for voting in the Senate. So what the experience? He ran a nonprofit that no longer is functioning, or no longer in operation, into non-existence. So that's, if I recall correctly. I mean, no, that's what I recall.
No, you're right, and don't forget that film was made here by one of the members of the Harris family. Remember that film they made by
the Chameleon Street.
Yeah, that's right,
Street,
exactly.
Yeah.
When this guy was pretending to be a doctor, and was he just a doctor, or was he in different roles? I
think I think it was a composite character. They had people who had passed themselves off for different things. I think they made it one person doing it. They'd taken vignettes or snippets of other people who were pretenders, and they did quite well. A lot of people assume roles. I mean, there was a president of college up at Kirtland Community College up here just a few years ago. Can't remember the guy's name. He didn't have the qualifications for it. He lied about it. But under his tenure as the president, that college expanded far greater than he did any previous guy who had the experience or they were allegedly needed. So, that happens.
You can imagine how embarrassing it is. How embarrassing it must be for these members of the House and the Senate, former presidents and so on, who've had all this experience coming up through the ranks. And here's an outsider, a businessman coming in, and he has turned the country around. In fact, I think when history is written about the election 2016, it's going to go down as one of the most important elections this country has had in its history, because Donald Trump pulled this country back from the brink. And I think when history is written, it's going to be that by the election of 2016, Donald Trump was able to intervene and stop what was intended, which was to bring this country down to its knees, to fundamentally change this country, which is what Obama said. And I'll say it's about Obama. Obama will go down in history as one of the worst presidents this country has produced.
See, I think there's going to be two.
I know you're not going to like that, but that's exactly the truth. And what is really a galling is blacks don't even realize how this man was a usurper.
See, I think there's going to be two narratives. There's going to be the one, there's going to be official one in the history books. Barack Obama made great inroads, and he was this great heroic character. I don't know what was really heroic about any of it, but then you're going to have people who will kind of teach your children privately what what they think was a track record of Donald Trump. But I don't think we're going to last that long to actually see where it's going to flesh out in reality. I just don't think we're going to be around that much.
The country is definitely in trouble, but Obama is a usurper in a very different way than what's been ferreted out and discerned by the political pundits that were looking at his birth and was he born here in this country or born elsewhere and all of that. They were looking in the wrong place. I think that Obama was born in the United States, and that's not the issue. The issue for blacks was whether or not this man embodies the things that blacks were fighting for in this country, and whether or not he is a custodian of that legacy, or even if he's a part of that legacy. And if so, how would that be the case when his father, who was the black part of his parentage, is in Kenya, and his mother is from Kansas, and never was had anyone in the cotton patch? How is Obama the custodian and the recipient of the benefits of that when the country finally was ready to elect a black president? Not because of the civil rights movement, but because the country has shifted in terms of the highest office and so on and so forth, and they're ready to try to bring about a balancing of what had happened in the past and then to do something now to make amends for it. And here comes Obama, who wasn't a part of that history. This man, I call him what he is. He's a usurper of the legacy of blacks in this country. He had nothing to do with that history that this country was trying to pay amends to because of the suffering that occurred in such places as slavery, sitting in the back of the bus. What does that do? What does that have to do with Barack Obama's legacy in this country? His father was never a part of this country and never was a citizen of the United States. In fact, I said this before and got a lot of heat from it. Not heat really, because nobody can put any heat on me. I don't feel any heat because I know the people that's out there running their mouth don't know what they're talking about, and really none of them are qualified. And I keep saying that. I said this on Facebook. That's another reason they threw me off. None of them are qualified to tie my shoes. They don't let me saying that. But that's the honest gospel truth. Obama is a usurper. Obama is Jacob. I'm not talking about that biblically. I'm just saying that how Jacob took the birthright from Esau. The same way in which the birthright was stolen, what was really due Esau, Jacob took it. The same way that occurred, that's what Obama did to blacks in this country, and they have not awakened to it yet. That's
a good analogy because Barack Obama actually, just saying something positive about him. He valued the symbols of power. He valued the covenant basically, and if you want to use that continue with that as a analogy. Whereas American people, the American blacks, seem to kind of sold it for a bowl of lentil soup.
Yeah, Obama fooled a lot of people. This man doesn't have any allegiance to blacks, and his pedigree. The fact this man was born away from the history of the United States, in the sense that blacks have this legacy, and that would be Douglas and those persons. Where is that legacy part of what Obama would be part of? Harriet Tubman. Where does Obama? Just somebody can tell me. You see me walking down the street or in the stores and so on and so forth. You come over there and want to have these conversations. Just tell me when you stop me again. Just tell me, what does Obama have to do with any of that? Going back to the blacks who got off who were on that Dutch ship in 1619, from 1619 to 1865, what does that history have to do with Barack Obama? And I've asked that before, and I don't get any answers. All I get is people just thinking they can raise an objection without any information. It doesn't work here. You got to have some information, and you don't have any. What you have is a lot of emotion, but you've not looked at this usurpation that every black in this country should be offended by, because when the country was ready to make amends for the past, which was basically what the Democrats had done, the Democratic Party had done, when they're ready to look at this and try to do some balancing of that history with what is happening in the present, ready for a black president, this man, this usurper, steps in the gap, and that which belonged to blacks who started off their sojourn here in this country in 1619, this man jumps in front of that by standing on the steps of the old State House in Springfield, Illinois, where Lincoln and Stephen Douglas had done their debates in 1858. And he stands there in the shadows of Abraham Lincoln as if he has dropped the mantle in his lap rather than the laps of blacks who really were the custodians of that history. Obama has nothing to do with that history. And if he does, what? I call him what he is a usurper. and they've not caught on to it yet. This man stood in there and jumped in front of this change that had occurred in the country, and then stood there as if he is the recipient. That's why he stood in the shadows of Abraham Lincoln, because the American people made a connection that we've come this far. Here were the slaves, and then look where blacks are today. Here's a man running for president, from the plantation to the presidency. Look how much progress has been made. But that progress had nothing to do with Barack Obama. And I keep asking the question, if it does anything to do with Barack Obama, then somebody ought to tell me what the connection is. It's certainly not through his mother.
Well, another thing is too, in one interview, and I can't remember what was read, he was actually kind of saying he really didn't think Abraham Lincoln did all that much for the blacks. Yet when he took office, he swore his oath of office on the Bible that was connected to the same one that Lincoln had used during his first inauguration. So I mean, okay, you kind of crapped on the first guy's memory right now at first, and now you're embracing it. And because of what? Because of Illinois? Is that the common denominator? I mean, I don't really understand that.
Barack Obama is already, in my mind, the biggest fraud that's ever held that office, and there have been a lot of frauds. Abraham Lincoln was a fraud. You can go and read the book called "The South Was Right." I brought that book, as a matter of fact, to the studio because I thought I might get into that just on the QT and running. But this book, I keep talking about this book, written by James Ronald Kennedy and Walter Donald Kennedy. Their important book, "The South Was Right." And everybody thinks you're talking about endorsing that when you say the South was right, that you're talking about they were right about holding on to their slaves, as if this is what this war was about. You have to go back and read the real history of the United States. This war was not about slavery. Abraham Lincoln wasn't trying to free any slaves. And I have it on the best evidence I can have it on his first inaugural address, which nobody quotes. Abraham Lincoln said in his first inaugural address that he had no intention of freeing any slaves. You can go read it for yourself. The speech he gave March the 4th, 1861. Now, all of these Lincoln apologists, that's what they are, pretty much apologizing for what they wish he had been, what they wish Abraham Lincoln had stood for. And they've imposed their view of Abraham Lincoln upon the public, not the real Abraham Lincoln, who you can find him out by reading the book by Thomas De Lorenzo, a book called The Real Abraham Lincoln, or his first book on Lincoln, which was Lincoln Unmasked, or some of these other books like Lincoln Reconsidered, or the book written by this black historian, Leron Bennett, Lincoln's White Dream. And get the real Lincoln, the one they put in the place of this man who was a butcher of the American people from 1861 to 1865. This man should have been brought up on war crimes. And they've used the slavery issue to hide what really went on in this war. This was the South rising up for the same reason that we're seeing going on right now, what Donald Trump is doing. This tariff stuff that Donald Trump is engaged in. And this is banditry also. You know what? All the tariff, what's happening right now with the tax break, you got a tax break with lowering the taxes. In other words, getting government out of the way. And then look what happens when you get government out of the way. We can breathe freer in the country. The economy can take off. But then what the government give it, the government take it away. And so they had a tax break, and then you have these tariffs going on right now. And who do you think pays for that? Just because the Russians are, in fact, raising the tariff, have a higher tariff in their country, which is a tax paid for by their people, does not mean the government ought to raise the taxes over here through the backdoor approach. And Donald Trump was saying that he loved tariffs. I guess so, because the money from the tariff goes to the federal coffers and hide the deficit. As they're spending, all they do is get more money, spend more money. Nothing goes toward paying down the debt. But that's why the South rose up against these gangsters through the use of the Second Amendment. And when the American people wake up to what's really going on, And we're going to get into that next week when we talk about this book that I finally read, this book called Family of Secrets that I talked about 2 weeks ago. Thought it would be here last week, but it came late and I wasn't able to have had it read. I read it now, and everything that I have been saying here, I can now document it through the book called Family of Secrets, America's Invisible Government and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years. Really, the history has been hidden from the beginning of this country because we're being sold a different history than the history that's actually been there. That's been in place. We've been taught a false narrative as a way of compelling the people to act a certain way, because those that don't know the past are doomed not only to repeat its mistakes, they are doomed to not understand why what is happening, because history is a way of explaining the present. That's why you must have a correct historical perspective, because history is a study of the present through looking at the past. And I saw that and I can just tell you that I saw that when I was in Egypt. I saw the two-headed, the image of the god of Egypt, Osiris, that had two heads come out of the same body, one looking that way and one looking that way, one looking to the left, and then another head looking to the right, joined together in the same body. And that the idea was looking to the past while standing in the present in order to know what to do as we go toward the future. And without a historical understanding of looking at the past, you won't even know where you're standing and won't even know where you're going in the future. And the past, as it relates right now, is that they have an invisible history, the hidden history of the last 50 years. But we have a history that they are putting in front of the public right now. We don't even know what occurred in 2016. There was no Russian collusion in 2016. The American people went to the poll in our lifetime right now. 3 years ago, went to the poll, and they're telling us that what we did, we didn't do. Russia did it. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. When we come back next week, we'll start talking about this book a little bit, because this book really spells it out, and we'll go through it with in more detail. Okay, we want to get out of here. We want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.